This episode of We Interrupt This Broadcast is sponsored by Getty Images, home to market-leading creative and editorial content from the world's best photographers and videographers. Getty Images is a trusted partner and creative advisor to media and production companies and YouTube native studios, offering over 37 million footage clips, including video from a range of world-renowned broadcast, studio, filmmaker, and archive partners. If you're looking for historical, contemporary, or creative footage, head to gettyimages.com to find out more.
Hello and welcome to We Interrupt This Broadcast for another monthly wrap-up hosted by myself, Loani Arman, and Aven Yap. Hi, Aven.
Hi, Loani.
What have you been up to this month?
I've been production managing a film that's shooting in Sydney in October. We're in pre-production right now, and it's a supernatural romance.
That sounds cool. I have been writing on a kids series, a really great kids series. The whole process has just been such a joy and great as a mum to be writing a kids TV because I can just relate to it on so many different levels.
Let's dive into the month of August.
Now, Aven, you and I are Queenslanders, and we're like most Queensland film and television practitioners. We're fiercely loyal and fiercely protective of what we built in Queensland. There was a terrifying email from Spa earlier this month.
Yeah, the headline of the EDM from Screen Producers Australia read Queensland screen funding under threat. And the second EDM that followed this offered a bit more detail, saying that Screen Queensland's funding from the Queensland government may be slashed over the next few years. As a matter of urgency, they convened a member meeting to discuss the implications such cuts could have for the sector and what steps SPA members can take to advocate against potential reductions.
And then over the weekend, the Minister for the Arts in Queensland, John Paul Langbrook, announced that the Queensland government had committed $50 million over the next 2 years to Screen Queensland. Now that sounds like a big headline, right? Sounds like they're not making cuts, except when you look at what they actually allocated last year. So last financial year, Aven, the Queensland government allocated $42 million to screen industry, attraction and development. Now, the government announces that they're going to spend $50 million, but it's spread over 2 years. So let's assume that's split down the middle. That's $25 million a year. So they're effectively cutting $42 million down to $25 million a year. That's a 40% reduction. And here's the thing, that's the money that attracts productions to the state. These incentives are investments, Aven. They bring productions to Queensland, productions that spend money across the entire state. You cut that budget down and those productions slow down, or worse still, they cease to come. Looking at what came into Queensland last year, off that $42 million investment, the government reported over $500 million in production spending coming into the state. By reducing their investment, they're willing to throw away potentially hundreds of millions of dollars that would flow through the economy. We're talking crew and production jobs lost. We're talking catering. We're talking equipment rentals, post-production, accommodation owners, transport operators, all the people in that pipeline who make productions happen, the small business owners that populate our industry. All of those businesses lose a hell of a lot of work. And I have to say, Aven, that is a terrifying reality that we now face in Queensland.
I have a project that I'm planning to mount in Brisbane, aiming to shoot in May next year. And there would be quite a significant gap in my finance. And I would very likely need to consider taking the project to a different state. Roughly 120 jobs would be lost. That's quite concerning for someone who's trying to tell a very localized, culturally specific Brisbane story based on real events, but sometimes this is just the reality behind the scenes of making the money work.
We finally have momentum in this state. We had 2 years later shooting here for Paramount Plus. We have series like Fortitude Valley that's just wrapped. It took years to build that kind of pipeline, and now it's being dismantled by this budget cut. It's going to take years to repair. Screen Tasmania has also had a massive shuffle and cut to their budgets, and equally distressing news, a $300,000 reduction in funding, which is substantial for Screen Tasmania, and a downsizing in staff. This blew my mind. They're reportedly down to only 1.5 positions to run Screen Tasmania.
And we're talking about a screen economy that has been thriving. There's an alliance that are advocating against all of these changes called the Tasmanian Filmmakers Alliance that says that Screen Tas has generated more than $100 million in economic returns against approximately $17 million in screen production investment. That's a really impressive return on investment over the last 15 years. When we're looking at two state agencies that are facing dramatic budget cuts, what are your thoughts?
We are a cottage industry compared to the UK and to the US, and hence why government intervention is so critical to sustain our screen businesses. But what happens when those government agencies are compromised? Will the entire industry fall apart? Have we become too reliant on government subsidies and investment? It looks like it's going to be a really tough time for a lot of filmmakers in the Tasmanian and Queensland industry, and it's going to be a matter of innovate or die.
So here's the call. If you're in the screen industry, or if you're a listener of the podcast, if you're a small business owner relying on production work, if you care about screen culture, if you care to see Queensland grown stories on screen, you need to do something about it. Now is the time to make noise. Reach out to your local MP, reach out to the Premier, reach out to press, reach out to SPA, reach out to your guilds. We need to make some noise around this, because that's the only way that the government will listen. They will listen to the small business owners that are affected by this. They will listen to crews whose livelihoods are at risk. Tell the government what you stand to lose. We need to rally together.
In news that I found really disappointing, Aven, Managing Director of the ABC, Hugh Marks, has done a restructure. The Indigenous department, as we know it, has ended in its current form. And this is a department that was established back in the late 80s, has produced incredible work. We're talking about Redfern Now, Gods of Wheat Street, Clever Man, Total Control, Black comedy, Always Was Tonight, content that absolutely deserves its own department to best protect and to best nurture voices that we absolutely need to be serving on screen. The model now will transition to something that feels a little bit murky, I've got to say. It will be a new First Nations content model, which means Indigenous content would be distributed across ABC programming rather than have a dedicated department. I have to say that worries me. I'm not inside the organisation. I'm not inside that restructure. And maybe there's an effective model to be found there. But to me, that means we've gone back years. Indigenous creators coming up against the kind of content that we know gets an easier pathway to screen.
I think it's one thing to say something in your charter and another thing to actually live it out in practice. And look, I've lost count of the number of restructures I have witnessed at the organisation since I started in my career. This one particularly has a cultural sting to it.
It's hard to imagine that the dismantling of that Indigenous department won't have a big impact on First Nations content that's developed and commissioned in the future, particularly content that challenges audiences and provokes discussion like Always Was Tonight. It's hard to imagine that stories like that or projects like that will continue to be made. I'd be curious to know some answers on who now within the organisation is going to be championing First Nations content. As someone who's worked in commissioning before and someone who has desperately for my entire career wanted to see better representations on screen and off, it's still a fight. And you need those champions within those commissioning environments. And if there's not a dedicated department and industry doesn't know where to look to, who's their champion now? You know, I think back to something that Jodie Bell said in a deep dive episode when we interrupt this broadcast in terms of Indigenous content, we need to be supporting NITVs. So thankfully NITV exists. Make it the destination for First Nations content. Get your eyeballs onto NITV. Watch it to help them build up more funding to NITV.
Following an outcry from ABC staff and the entertainment industry, some media are reporting an industry consultation period has been extended. So watch this space. Screen Australia has just released the Screen Currency 2026 report, and Word on the Ground says it's the most significant piece of research that the agency has undertaken for the screen and video game sector. It's a research study that comprises of 5 reports paired with 16 supporting case studies, and it measures the local and global value of our industry from an economic, social, and cultural perspective. There were many takeaways from this report, Loani, but the main ones that really stood out to me were that Australians really do value Australian local content, but they just can't discover it. We know as filmmakers that discoverability has been a long, chronic illness in our industry because we just don't have the budgets that the Hollywood marketing machines have. We have to be a lot more scrappy, a lot more innovative in order to reach audiences.
I mean, it's a really comprehensive report that I think echoes so much of what the conversations in the screen sector have been for the last handful of years. Australians really value local content, but they're just not watching it. There's some stats in there. 84% of Australians agree that access to local screen content is important. 75% are interested in watching more, but nearly 2/3 of Australians spend less than 30% of their time on it, and only 36% say it's easy to locate. Games is different. 95% of Australian game revenue comes from overseas. So there's a real global interest in what Australian gaming is doing. Children's TV, it feels vanished. It feels gone. That's devastating.
Nicole Del Prado, who is a producer at Pike Salto, posted an insight after reading the Screen Currency report. And for kids' content, averaged out, only 21 hours is produced in Australia. Averaged out, that's less than half an hour a week of new Australian children's drama across every age bracket, animation and live action, broadcast and streaming. No wonder why Australian kids are moving to YouTube.
You know, even like any data, headlines are just a start. And we need to ask, what does this mean in practice to creators and producers? What are the concrete solutions that exist out of this? Is it a case of not just investment in production, but looking at infrastructure and looking at how are we going to find that audience? Is this a case for Screen Australia to get more funding? Like, what's the purpose of this report? Because again, this does seem to echo reflections and conversations that are already existing within the industry, and good to have that validated, but what's the next step?
I mean, compared to the 2016 Seeing Ourselves on Screen report that Screen Australia released, that report made a landmark impact on the industry. We saw so many new voices coming into the sector, people of colour, Black, Indigenous, creatives, actors, really being platformed and getting the talent investment and escalation that they needed. But this is already common knowledge. While there are big questions in the data, I think there are already some big ideas that have been discussed on our podcast. Kate Saparovich, who did an entire episode on the feature film landscape, speaks directly about the issue of discoverability, of marketing, distribution, creative, pulling each other down like a bucket full of lobsters. And she proposes a number of big ideas in order to solve those issues. So go and check out Kate Saparovich's episode in our podcast. News coming out of Germany, Suno AI, a tool for music creators, has been ruled in a German court to have broken copyright laws because they were training on songs without a license.
And within those songs was Forever Young, Mambo No. 5. So huge songs. The German music body that protects music rights, which is called GEMA, it's like the Australian version of APRA, sued Suno AI for copyright infringement. So it's a really interesting precedent for the Australian screen industry in terms of the conversation that's happening around AI at the moment.
And I think where Suno AI got it wrong, our sponsor Getty Images may actually be getting it right. They have a really interesting indemnified AI tool. It's all material that they own outright. One argument can be made that AI is necessary in order for individual professionals to make their practice more sustainable. But something that's quite interesting about what Getty has done is that they have recently extended their creative and editorial subscriptions to individual professionals like YouTubers. I think this is one example of companies doing right by the creatives by changing the scope of their offerings in order to adapt to the marketplace, rather than twisting the arm of the creatives to use AI in order to make their work more sustainable.
In Indonesia, they're drafting AI copyright law right now that bans AI from imitating specific artist style without consent.
One of the bits of language that I found quite interesting in that news regarding Indonesia is that copyright protection to AI-assisted work would only be given if a human was meaningfully involved. Now, I don't know what meaningful involvement with a human actually means, but shouldn't anything artistic have some sort of meaningful human involvement?
Look, this is my massive moral conundrum about the use of AI. So much of responsible and ethical use comes down to the person who's behind the tools being the one to know where that line is. And look, not to say that I don't trust people, but I don't trust people, Aven. I don't trust most people to know where they're drawing the line. These tools are designed to feel like that line between your humanity and your decision-making and your creative choices is blurred. I feel like it's a bad drug, and that once you lean into AI to assist your creative, then you're gone. Then you need to be into some sort of creative rehab. That's what we need, Aven. We need creative rehab for people to go back and connect to their humanity. There's a really good business idea for somebody out there.
I read in Forbes that Anthropic's Claude will now put invisible watermarks on AI text and images, and the internet isn't very happy with this. And Screen Australia and some of our agencies are now looking to gather data about what AI uses behind applications and in the creative materials that are submitted.
I'm in favour of it. I know it's annoyed a lot of people. And look, maybe one day if I ever jump on the AI bandwagon, maybe it'll annoy me. But right now, I was the solo person clapping that in the comments. One of the things I do love about having 4 different hosts that we do all have varying opinions and varying relationships with AI. I've got a very distant relationship to AI, I will say. I didn't know Claude was an AI tool until a friend of mine was telling me Claude could do something, and I thought that they had employed someone new called Claude.
I'm constantly torn about it now. I think as a young person, I see the data centers and the amount of water that gets boiled just to power these data centers. And I'm thinking, am I going to have a world to live in the next 20, 30 years if this is the track that we keep following?
100%. It's easy for it to be the future's problem, but it's not. The future is upon us, particularly when it comes to damaging the planet. So it is festival and market season. We've just had Melbourne International Film Festival and 37 South Market. Aven, you attended 37 South for the first time.
It's an extremely productive format in that you don't have to book your own meetings. You just surrender your will to the 37 South programmers. And you have these 20-minute meetings, 5 minutes to change over in between roughly. And that's just your whole day for 4 days straight. And you are paired up with sales agents, distributors, potential co-production partners, not only in Australia, but also internationally. And I thought the international representation was really, really strong. The Aven Yap TM Marketplace insight from MIF 37 South is that every international sales agent that I spoke to are looking for genre, crowd pleasers, easy to release films, even some of those iconic international sales agents who are known for art house and drama. I think this goes to show that not only in Australia, but also in the international market, it is incredibly challenging to release movies at the moment. Over the 4 days, there were 3,300 scheduled meetings, 448 delegates, and at their last count, about 1,150 cups of coffee.
I feel like that coffee estimate was a bit conservative. The ScreenWorks Regional to Global is coming up in Lennox Head, a really fantastic conference, September 9th and 10th. Excitingly, we also have some of our We Interrupt This broadcast team there this year. Robbie Miles and Kirsty Stark both attending and both speaking. Sometimes those smaller, more regional conferences showcases and festivals are actually where you have better access to those water cooler moments with industry. So get along if you want to catch up with some of the team.
By the time we release this, the Australian Children's Content Summit will also be happening right now in Coffs Harbour. It's my first one, and it's a bit like school camp, which is refreshing for any sort of industry conference, which can be quite stressful and hectic. Also announced this month, 3 Australian features have been selected for the inaugural TIFF International Financing and Projects Market. My Mises, Do Not Wake, and The Five Fathers are among 40 films selected for the curated program, which aims to accelerate finance and help find co-production and international collaborators. This is the first time where they are putting a small market adjacent to the festival itself. In the creator economy space, BBC Studios is launching Creator Lab Australia, which is a new program that will give Australian YouTube creators access to the BBC established IP, as well as mentoring and development opportunities. This initiative is supported by SBS and will be delivered with Changes Studios and BBC Studios Talent Works.
Changes Studios have been working in this space for a very long time, so it's an exciting opportunity for content creators. Anyone interested in applying will have to get their skates on because applications close on the 6th of September. And coming up at the end of August is the Microdrama Forum, which we learned about from one of our listeners, Rachel Lee.
A bunch of industry panels covering everything from microdrama screenwriting to distribution, and the launch of Vertical 48, a 48-hour microdrama challenge to be held in September.
Lots happening in production across the country. In Victoria, our friends at Haven't You Done Well have their first feature film, Crimecasters, shooting. Also in Queensland, Paramount Plus Australia has confirmed filming has wrapped on a new original series, Who the Hell is Hamish? This is by Hoodlum Entertainment, my ex-colleagues, Tracy Vieira, Nathan Mayfield, and Tracy Robertson. And this has been a project they've been working on for many, many years, so I'm very excited to see this project getting closer to release.
Aven, what have you been watching?
I've been enjoying a really cute kids show, surprisingly, called Pit Pats, which I am obsessed by. It's by the wonderful and talented husband and wife duo, Darcy Prendergast and Josie Macaras. And it's a gentle, low-stimulation Australian mixed media preschool series. There is an extraordinary sequence in their first episode where they literally filmed in stop motion grass growing from seeds over about a week.
That's so cool. I would watch that.
And how about you, Loani? What are you watching?
I have been binging. I've been into the back catalogue of Wentworth like nobody's business. And shout out to the incredible team behind it. One of my ex-colleagues who I worked with at SBS, Penny Wynn, was executive producer for Foxtel behind this show. But there's just so much great talent. Nicole De Silva as Frankie. Nicole's an old friend of mine. It is such fantastic bingeable drama that gives you all the right levels of like deep, good character work, excellent casting, but also like lots of melodrama and a bit of soap. This story world will continue with Binge announcing that they'll be doing Wentworth Halfway Home. I binged Killings at Parish Station, which I thought was so excellent, like such a gripping supernatural crime drama. And I also have started on the F Ward, which is super interesting. Did you see the news about the F Ward selling to 100 territories pre-launch, Aven? Did you read that news?
It's such an extraordinary outcome for Paramount Global content distribution, and it is literally the country's fastest pre-launch selling drama.
And I love medical dramas. Like, they've built the engine so well. They've cast it so well. Super contemporary. Now, we're not simply sort of just looking at a bunch of white people doing white people medical stuff. Like, the casting is so diverse and interesting. So there's lots of different viewpoints coming in. A great outing. Amazing with those sales behind it. Unsurprising.
And that's all for the month of August. See you at Regional to Global for those who are going. And now back to your regular programming.
We Interrupt This Broadcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the
Gadigal people of the Eora Nation,
the Turrbal and Yagara people,
the Yugambeh language people,
and the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, and we acknowledge them as the traditional custodians and first storytellers of these regions.
always was, always will be.